The end is something most of us know is coming, but don't always grapple with it on a daily basis. At least, most of us don't think of it frequently, yet it is an undeniable part of life. It will, in fact, eventually end. Maybe not now, maybe not tomorrow, but someday, somewhere down the line, it will. Which brings me to a poignant question. When you're given the news that your death is coming, and it's soon, what do you do? How do you react to it? Do you take as much time to yourself, trying to avoid reality? Try to protect your family in the inevitable circumstances? Or do you try to make a system for those after you to not deal with your struggles? We tend to use our fiction as a way to grapple with these ideas. Yet in comics, the concept of death is barely taken on. Death in comics is almost never permanent unless your name is Thomas Wayne or Uncle Ben, as we all know how the joke goes. Characters who may have been gone for years upon years can easily come back. Just look at storylines like Under the Red Hood, The Winter Soldier, The Death and Resurrection of Superman, and many more. Now I want to clarify, none of these stories are bad for not leaving characters dead. In fact, the three I mentioned are better for reviving characters. Sometimes it could be a good thing for a writer to bring back someone from death if there's something to be made from it, but this can come at the cost of a sense of finality, of weight. After so many resurrections, it would be an incredibly difficult task to kill a superhero and make it impactful. And this is where we make it to the subject of today's video, All-Star Superman by Grant Morrison and Frank Quitley. This iconic duo in the comics landscape went out of their way to put themselves onto a heavy task by asking the world and themselves, how do you kill Superman? And how do you make it work? On all accounts, it's an almost arrogant question to even ask yourself. Kill Superman? Of all writers, what gives anyone the gall to kill Superman? Not just one of the most popular superheroes of all time, but the superhero, the blueprint, Subject Zero, the root from which many others grew from. And yet, there isn't a team who wasn't more prepared for this. If you're a longtime comic fan like me, Grant Morrison needs no introduction. He is one of my favorite writers of all time, not just in comics, but in all of fiction. He's one of those few writers I'd say just has the golden touch. Morrison was born and raised in Glasgow, Scotland in 1960. In secondary school, he actually showed off his art portfolio to his career guidance teacher, who apparently rejected it and told him to go work at a bank. So I guess guidance counselors aren't known for doing much in the UK either, huh? Of course, he would refuse that notion and spent years working in the British indie comic scene. The scene of writers and artists was sort of the bubbling explosion just waiting to happen. But when it finally came to America, it came in strong. Morrison was part of what many call the British invasion of writers. Even though, well, Morrison is Scottish. I know what you're gonna say, the term British applies to all the UK. Does it? Does it really? Because anyone I've met from Wales, Ireland, and Scotland prefers to be referred by the nationality of their homeland and not the empire that took them over, but I digress. He got a pretty big name for himself in these groups, eventually getting popular for making the series Zenith for 2000 AD, which almost all the big writers from the UK that make it big in American superhero comics usually have worked for 2000 AD at some point. 2000 AD is the company that published Judge Dredd and other related books, by the way, for anyone who didn't know that. He really got his foot in the door with his landmark DC comic series, Animal Man, which is a really massive deal. In my opinion, Animal Man is up there in importance to the 80s comics renaissance as much as Watchmen, Swamp Thing, Dark Knight Returns, The Sandman, Daredevil Born Again, Uncanny X-Men, TMNT. Okay, looking back on it, the 80s were debatably the best era for Western comics in general. After getting his foot in the door with Animal Man, Morrison would go on to make tons of mind-bending, experimental, and surprisingly successful comics. Doom Patrol, Arkham Asylum, The Invisibles, New X-Men, We 3, I really can keep going. He has so many great series that he's worked on and put out there. He's made a name for himself, really expanding the concepts and ideas you can discuss in Western comics, but also making works like that take time to really digest, layering them with many themes and abstractions and heavy concepts. I could talk about his work for hours because he is genuinely one of my favorite writers. Yet in many of Morrison's works, it's good to note that many of them have had art done by Frank Quitley. Frank Quitley, also known as Vincent Patrick Deegan, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, I am not Scottish in the slightest, so correct me if I said it wrong, is one of the most respected artists of the modern age of comics. He has a style that I'd say is a blend of strange yet grounded. He's really able to master and get down these larger-than-life comic book oddities into a visual form that people can recognize and digest. Much like Morrison, he got a lot of his early work published in the UK indie scene. However, this was during the 90s and not the 70s. He'd get his first work publishing strips, until getting noticed by Judge Dredd magazine. You see, I told you, this is the place where all the great UK talent goes to. Eventually from there, he'd end up going to DC and working on many books under the DC Vertigo label, which just so happened to be where Morrison had much of his work published. Thus, they became frequent collaborators, but Quitley would go on to work with many other writers as well. Notably, he worked with Mark Millar on The Authority for years before moving on to Marvel with Morrison to work on New X-Men. If you want some of his most notable work, other than All-Star Superman, check out We 3, New X-Men, The Authority, Flex Metallo, and Missionary Man. Though if you've noticed by now, I've done a distinct lack of speaking about All-Star Superman. And I think it's about time I fix that. Morrison wastes zero time introducing us into the story. He has this almost film-like style of writing for this narrative. Honestly, if Morrison were to come out tomorrow and say All-Star Superman started as a script for a Superman film he was writing, I wouldn't be surprised. Sure, it's not completely paced like a film, but it has this way of introducing something to you in a quick and easy to digest way that's very filmic, making far more room for emotional impact by not lingering on the sci-fi or fantastical explanations of what is happening. A great example of this is literally the first issue. It starts with 4 striking images back to back, transposed against the white void behind them, only using 4 words to give us all we need to know about why Superman is Superman. Doomed planet, desperate scientists, last hope, kindly couple. Then transitioning to Superman flying past the sun, the bright light behind him. That is one of the most cinematic openings to a comic of all time. And not in the way that people seem to misuse the word now because of the cinema meme, but actually filmic in its presentation. Which we then transition into this strange abomination of a creature, who is, of course, the creation of Lex Luthor. Which I don't remember Lex creating things in such a body horror way, but I'm not complaining. I love this type of horrific character design. Anyways, we see that the space vessel the creature is in is plummeting towards the sun. And of course, Supes comes in to save it. However, this is yet another of Lex Luthor's schemes, using Superman's goodwill against him and dragging him into the sun, thus blasting him with a ton of radiation. Of course, this cuts back and forth with Lex controlling the situation from far away, showing us his usual obsessive hatred of Superman. But this doesn't end like every other Luthor scheme. Superman learns from Leo Quintum, who's an ultra-intelligent scientist helping Superman throughout this series. Imagine if you put Willy Wonka, Gene Wilder's Willy Wonka, Reed Richards, and David Bowie in a blender. That's the best description I can give without just giving away the entire point of his character. Getting back on track, while trusting Quintum to take an analysis of his body, Superman learns that he took too large of a dose of solar radiation from his last encounter, which is making his body go into overdrive, temporarily making him stronger, while also now putting a ticking clock on his life. Likely, he will die soon. In a sense, giving the Man of Steel a sort of cancer that can't be cured or dealt with by any normal means. And this main premise sends a ripple effect down the rest of the series, having us follow Superman as he tries to do as much as he can with the little time he has left. From here on out, we get a story that is both a reflection point of everything Superman has been in comics, as well as a celebration for what Superman stands for. It tackles all the corners and core aspects of Superman's world, characters, philosophies, and yet doesn't feel bloated or forced in the slightest. Just to put this here, this is where I'll start talking about major spoilers. I highly recommend going into this book blind because it has many surprises packed into it, which I think are all better experienced knowing as little about what's going on besides the main premise. I'm just trying to warn you here because from here on out, this will be a spoiler-filled video, so don't say I didn't warn you. The first story within these 12 issues involves Lois Lane. It goes out of its way to highlight the strange dynamic the classic Lois and Superman had. The whole idea of her being into Superman but not knowing at all that he's really Clark Kent. We see her genuine disbelief at her learning the fact that the man she loves actually is Clark Kent. But she isn't going to take that lying down. Her reporter senses kind of get in the way because, well, why would Superman just out his secret identity to her? So she's less than willing to believe that Clark is, in fact, Superman. You could see the genuine struggle of him trying to earnestly show her who he really is. It's sort of a culture shock to her because she's really not used to existing in his, quite frankly, absurd world. I want to add here, Quitley is so good at adapting a lot of these Silver Age ideas, visuals, and tech into a more modern style while keeping a lot of the original charm. A lot of artists would have just completely changed a lot of the style and look of the Fortress of Solitude, So I gotta respect that he keeps all that in while making it feasible within the world represented. Anyways, this first issue in this story arc is a fun thriller-like story of Lois investigating the fortress to find out what's going on, which is made all the more wholesome when it's revealed that she was just getting into her own head. Superman brought her here to give her the greatest gift she's ever gotten. This leads into the second issue. A lot of the story arcs here are 2 issues each, which makes sense since it's only a 12-issue miniseries. Not everything is a 2-issue story, but some of them are. Anyways, this second half is all about Superman taking Lois along with him on his day-to-day superhero antics and adventures. And she's also been blessed with a day of superpowers, by the way. And to do this, Lois has been given a serum that gives her Superman-like powers for just one day. It gets out of hand at one point, but it's genuinely a beautiful story. This story is much like the rest until the finale. The next story focuses on Jimmy Olsen in a crazy scenario involving black kryptonite, which, in predictable fashion, turns Supes evil but also lowers his intellect. It's a fun story that does a smart way to tie into Doomsday, but not in the way you'd think. Of course, the Lex Luthor story here is a real highlight. In my opinion, All-Star Superman has peak Lex Luthor. He's at his most vile and vindictive in this story, and yet he does it all from prison. Yet Morrison takes a clever approach and instead has Luthor vent all of this to Clark. Now, we all know Clark is Superman, but instead he shows up as his usual civilian self to do an interview for the Daily Planet. The whole time Luthor just looks down at Clark, insulting him at every moment. Ironically, Clark is using his powers at every moment to save him from a very stressful situation. It's hilarious, but it also goes to show that, despite seeming so intelligent, Luthor just can't grasp certain things and will always get in his own way. He's just a bastard as he takes such great satisfaction with all the evil that he's doing. His insecurities just rotting him down to the core. He doesn't even care that he's being put to the electric chair because he killed Superman. Honestly, one of the most heartbreaking stories is when Clark goes back to Smallville. On paper, it should be a simple story, but it's somehow also the most high concept in the whole series, which is saying a lot for this series. Here we meet the various Supermen of the future. Okay, it's only 3, but they're all so drastically different from each other. The story is phenomenal in using the idea of Superman's legacy coming back to comfort him during a pretty rough period in his life. I don't even want to talk too much about it because it speaks for itself. The next story is a great use of Bizarro in his world. What is usually used as a joke character is now used to create such a strong sense of tragedy and empathy, stuck in a world of madness that pops out of the Underverse to feed whenever it needs to. Setting up this Doomsday scenario on Earth and the Bizarro homeworld, we just examine a story of Superman. Instead of trying to annihilate them, try to understand them, showing them their power and intellect to make a world better for themselves in the long run. Interestingly, we have the character of Zabaro, one of the only people on this planet who is more like Superman than the rest. A sort of Bizarro of Bizarro. Oh, that's why he's called that. In a way, Zabaro is the ultimate endpoint of what the Bizarro Project even was. Originally just being a mock Superman that wasn't quite cooked right, but now the whole Bizarro world is creating a strange and warped mirror of Superman's history. And yet here is Zabaro, his own thinking man who hates living here. His mind much closer to that of a thinker on Earth. On paper, he should be the villain, but I love that Morrison chose to instead make him a sort of tortured soul. In a sense, Zabaro is an extreme reflection of the loneliness Clark must feel. He is only one of few beings like himself on all of Earth. However, Zabaro grew up on Bizarro World, and thus, he only experienced the pure chaos and madness this world provides. You'd think this story sets up Zabaro as the villain trying to hijack Clark's attempt to rally the Bizarros and escape this world before he dies on it, but instead Superman comforts him and shows Zabaro that these people are better than he thought. Maybe instead of judging so harshly, he could try to go to their level every once in a while and do some good. The penultimate story is one that maybe we've seen a few times in Superman, but Morrison takes an angle to it that I find very interesting. 2 ancestors of Clark who are Kryptonian astronauts, which explains why they're all around the same age, space-time stuff, it's complicated. His ancestors have come to Earth in his absence, being stuck on Bizarro World, and have introduced Kryptonian ideas and culture to Earth. On paper, this isn't inherently a bad thing, but of course, this comes with the angle of Kryptonian superiority trying to turn Earth into New Krypton. Something Clark is heavily against. He is Kryptonian, sure, but he has no right to enforce a culture upon the people who already have such a vast amount of bright cultures here on Earth. Thus, this starts with a literal and ideological battle that ends up with the two ancestors starting to die off due to radiation they encountered, showing them the ultimate kindness in the end and allowing them both to move on together as a husband and wife. This is pretty obviously meant to be a reflection of what Clark is going through on a much more extreme scale. It isn't lost on me that this story is right before the finale of the series, which we'll talk about right now. The last 3 issues are definitely the most impactful of the series, starting us out with Superman trying to write his last will and testament to the people of Earth. We watch as he does so much in so little time, yet he's contemplating on everything he's done and what he wants to leave behind. We've seen all attempts to prevent Superman's death fail, and thus, Quantum has done one final experiment. He has created this sort of cube that is meant to examine what a world without Superman would look like. We watch as this universe evolves along with Superman saving so many lives. One of the most powerful moments being when he approaches a young girl at the edge and helps her to not go over it. He's trying to tie over loose ends. He even tries to bring Luthor over to the good side. And yet, on Earth Q, the world without Superman experiment, we begin to notice something. This world is starting to closely mimic reality, the history of our Earth. And yet, despite all the things we notice, it ends with us looking at someone in the early 1900s drawing something. Superman. Because even in a world without Superman, the concept is ever present and powerful in every reality, even if under different circumstances. This is one of the best examples of Morrison's ability to get meta and break the fourth wall. Many writers try to do this well, but Morrison is one of the few who knows how to properly use this talent of his and to make it poignant, using it to make examinations of our world and how it reflects the comics and vice versa. Yet, we still have to see the final battle. Luthor makes his way out of prison, scheming a way to get powers like Superman. While Clark is fighting a sentient star Luthor has work to deal with. Superman fighting the literal source of his powers, but at the same time, that source is beginning to kill him. That sentient sun basically trying to destroy the star that we revolve around. The battle is long in destruction, and while Superman does win, he can't stay conscious for much longer. He passes on as Clark Kent in the Daily Planet as Lex arrives, all powered up. The final issue starts with Clark experiencing some form of Kryptonian afterlife with his father Jor-El. They're in a Kryptonian rocket, having a conversation between father and son. Jor-El imparts flashes of wisdom onto his child, telling him so many things about what he'll do, but that he must go. In a sense, this is a clever inversion of Superman's origin, his birth matching his resurrection. When he wakes up, Clark uses his abilities and performance to trick Lex into a situation where he's still at the shorter end of the stick, even with all his powers. Doing one of the coolest moments in all of superhero comics, and straight up pointing at Lex with a gravity gun. A weakened Superman playing a game of cat and mouse with Lex Luthor, battling him throughout Metropolis until a complete curveball was thrown at us and Luthor. He starts to tear up, noticing how Superman sees the world for just a moment, and that moment, seeing all the interconnecting beauty of our world. Yet in that moment, time is up. His powers are out and Superman lands one final blow to Lex. Lex saying he knows how he could save the world, and Superman saying, "You could have saved the world a long time ago." In these final moments, the sun damaged from his battle with the sentient star, Superman gives one final kiss to Lois and embraces her before flying into the sun to save the Earth. He was never seen again after that, but the stories and the hope remains. And this is all to show you just how Morrison and Quitley have made a masterwork with All-Star Superman. It tackles everything about the character and ties it into this ultimate package. It becomes this large glowing light that every other writer of Superman looks towards when writing their stories. It completely understands what makes Superman a powerful concept and what makes it still matter today, representing all the good we are and all the good that we can be. In a sense, Superman is gone, but with an impact like his, can it really be forgotten? For anyone who's a Superman fan, this is probably the definitive Superman story for them. It definitely is for me. I love so many Superman comics, but if I had to pick one that encapsulates everything about him and his world into one story, it would absolutely be this one. Honestly, it's sort of hard to write about this story because it is generally agreed upon to be one of the best Western superhero comics ever. Yet it has impacted me greatly. This is one of the books that really grabbed me into Superman comics and especially into DC. If you're still somehow one of those people that genuinely believes Superman is boring and you can't make interesting stories with him, then I insist you read this comic. Because Superman has never been about the foes he faces or the power he attains, but the good he brings to everyone. In a sense, Superman is much like the thing that gives him his power. Sunlight. It illuminates all that it's basked in. And if you just learn to not be afraid of the powerful effects of it, it could bring you into a warmer, more bright world. And to me, there's nothing I'd want more. So thank you, Grant Morrison and Frank Quitley, for making All-Star Superman. And yeah, that's all I really gotta talk about for today. I actually started to do this video because I put out a poll on my channel and everyone voted on All-Star Superman. And while I'm at it, I'll put another poll down in the description. That way, if you want me to do another comics-based video, I'll let you guys decide below whatever I cover. It may not be the immediate next video I make, it might not even be the immediate next comic video I make since I've been reading something in the background. But maybe the one after that I'll definitely do. Seriously, I actually want to take people's considerations into questions. I only made a Blade video because someone asked for it kindly in the comments. I really don't mind taking suggestions if anyone has any. And not just suggestions that are meant to be memey and jokey, like genuine suggestions. I want to see what you guys like too, since I'm not doing this alone. There is an audience that somehow watches my videos. But anyways, with all that being said, I'll see you next time.